Brothers and sisters, welcome to session number 4, where I'm going to give you a crash course on how to taste whiskey. Are you ready? Before I jump right into it, you have to know that there are hundreds of different brands and styles. So finding your style, finding the whiskeys that you will like the most will take some time. In session 1, 2, and 3, we covered the essentials of whiskey, everything that you have to know about whiskey as a beginner and what you should expect. So if you haven't watched these videos, I highly recommend it to do so before you watch this video. So today we will learn what kind of equipment you need in order to taste whiskey properly. I will show you the first step process of tasting whiskey. I will provide you my personally designed flavor map and the map that I always use for tasting whiskeys. And this will facilitate your experience as well. And lastly, I will show you how you can get more value for the same amount of money. Before you start, here is a checklist what you will need to taste whiskey properly. So obviously you need a good bottle of whiskey, but most importantly, you need the proper glass. And here is a pretty big misconception that you will need a tumbler, which is actually not really a whiskey tasting glass, because what you need is a so-called Glencairn glass. This glass was first invented, so to say, in Scotland. It's licensed, which means that it is allowed only to be produced in Scotland. So it will be a bit more expensive, but it's really worth the money, and it's probably one of the best glasses to drink whiskey. And what you have to observe here, let me show you. Firstly, the bottom of the glass. So you see that it's pretty thick. And this is important because you want to hold the glass here because you don't want to warm up the whiskey in it. So you will hold from here. Secondly, you see the bottom of the glass, which is pretty wide. And this is also very important because once you pour the whiskey, you want to gently swirl the whiskey so that it can breathe. It's just like with wine. So you need here a wider bottom for the liquid. And most importantly, you see that the upside, the top of the glass is narrowed. And this is very important because this will concentrate the aromas and flavors to the top, to your nose. Because have a look. Once you nose it, look, it's exactly centered to my nose. So the aromas will be concentrated on the nose, and this is very, very essential. And also one more function of this narrow mouth is that once you are sipping it, you will see that here it's pretty narrow. So when the liquid comes, when the whiskey comes, it will be centered on your tongue and it won't burn you. Because what happens if you drink from the tumbler? The tumbler has a much wider mouth. So once you are drinking, it can spill all over in your mouth and it will burn you. And you really want to avoid this. You want the whiskey just to take a sip from the whiskey, and that will arrive smoothly on your tongue. So this is why this glass is considered to be just right for tasting whiskey. You will need water, first of all, to drink it, because you don't want to get drunk while you are tasting whiskey. And also, as you saw from the previous sessions, you always want to add a couple of drops of water to your whiskey. For that, you will need a pipe. Of course, this just facilitates so that you can very precisely add water, a specific amount of water to your whiskey. And notebook and pen is not essential, but for example, I'm always using it because I just want to write down my notes and compare it with other whiskey tastings. Now let me show you the four-step process of tasting whiskey. First, it always starts with the appearance. And here, let me already pour a whiskey, a wee dram to my glass so that I can show you a bit better. By the way, this whiskey, I got it from my brother. This is an Ardnamurchan single malt, and I really enjoy this. And you will see in a second what are my notes on this whiskey. So here is the label if you want to check it, but I will tell you more just in a second. So first, the whiskey tasting always starts by checking the color and the appearance of the whiskey. So you might ask, why do you want to do that? But if it's a really good whiskey, the appreciation of the whiskey already starts by looking at it. So here you just take a look and you just appreciate your whiskey. The second step is nosing it. And this is pretty essential because there are so many aromas in a whiskey you won't believe. So you really want to first see what you can expect, because once you start to nose it, your brain already starts to prepare what to expect once you are drinking it. It's a very complex process. So yeah, it's really worth it. Then comes the third step, which is taking a sip, finally. And here I want to differentiate between the palate and the finish. What this means is that most people don't really split these two, but I think it makes sense because on the palate, first you want to see the mouthfeel of the whiskey. How does it feel when it's in your mouth? So how is the texture? How is the body of the whiskey? And once you swallow it, that's where the finish comes in. And on the finish, you want to first check, is this a long finish or is this rather a short finish? And secondly, does the nose and the palate come through to the finish? Because if it's the case, that's the sign of a good quality whiskey. But you might ask the question, how to pick up aromas and flavors from the whiskey? So first, it is very, very difficult. So probably you will need some guidance at the beginning. Because imagine that when you have an apple in your hand, you know that that's an apple. You can smell it, you can eat it, and you know what to expect. But when you pour a dram, you don't know what to expect. You smell it, you taste it, and there are just so many flavors, and you really have to extract something. And at the beginning, this is incredibly difficult. But you can start by just simply looking at the packaging or on the bottle and on the distillery webpage, because for the good whiskeys, we always will be a short description of nose, palate, and finish, what to expect, and that can give you already a very good guidance. So read that and afterwards try to explore the whiskey and focus on those specific aromas and flavors. You can also go to tasting events where professionals will also give you a guidance and show you different whiskeys, different styles, and how to approach them. But that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. And lastly, a flavor map can be also very useful, and you will see in a second what kind of flavor map I have. Here I took this picture from Eddie Ludlow, where you have the official names or official categorizations for the different colors. I don't want to overstretch this point because I also do not care that much, whether it's a bit lighter or a bit darker. Yeah, it can be interesting, but also it's not the most interesting point. And here is my own designed flavor map. You see here 8 categories, 8 big categories, and next to them you see subcategories, nuanced categories. And at the beginning, it's very, very useful if you start from the more general and you head towards the more specific aromas and flavors. You will see why. And this is what also Eddie Ludlow recommends. So here you can see that, for example, you say that, wow, this whiskey is very fruity. Okay, that's a good first step. But be more precise. What do you mean by fruity? You mean apples? Very good. Can you be even more specific? And then this is when a tasting note becomes really, really interesting because taste is subjective and everyone will say it or describe it a bit differently. And now let me start doing this live on this American whiskey. This is a 6-year-old whiskey. It was primarily matured in ex-bourbon barrels and also in sherry casks. So a very nice combination. It's natural color and unchill filtered. So integrity bottling, we really like that. And we also know, despite the young age, how old it is. So very good. We start with the appearance, as you know. So I would put this down as a pale gold. It's a fairly light whiskey. From this color, you could already tell that probably it's a bit younger and that it's primarily ex-bourbon maturation. And second, we start with the nosing. So let me nose it. Okay, so let's start with the big categories. Peat smoke. This whiskey is smoky, yes, definitely. But in terms of smoke, it's not that brutal. So it takes obviously a lot of experience, and you need to taste many whiskeys in order to have relative valuation, so to say, because you have to judge which whiskey is how smoky, for example. So this one, in my experience, is below average. So for this one, I can tell you that I would give roughly 2 out of 5. And the type of smoke is more like vegetal. So we can move on to the next point, which is oak. And since this is a fairly young whiskey, the oak influence is not that strong, but it's definitely there. So I would give you like 3 for this oak category, and there I can definitely pick up some sweet oak and maybe a touch of vanilla, but not too strong. Moving on, this is a very sweet whiskey. So already on the nose, I can smell that it's very, very sweet. And this sweetness is a bit fruity, but it's more like dried honey and also tons of caramel, like really a lot of caramel. In terms of spice, it's not that super spicy, but it's also pretty difficult to pick up spices on the nose. It's a little bit salty. So this is the briny and marine category, because this distillery is on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean on the west coast of Scotland. So imagine that the casks are there for many years and they are breathing that salty air. And that's in the whiskey. It's amazing. And next category is citrus and floral. Yes, this is probably the most dominant in this whiskey. So this is a very fresh whiskey, tons of lemon. So fresh lemon and also lemon zest. Very nicely. I really, really like this freshness of the whiskey. Also cereals, yes, you have this barley sugar and malty tones. It's a really clean, a really transparent whiskey. And the next two categories are more like for the body, for the palate and the finish. So here is my flavor map for this whiskey. So let me take a sip. very, very good quality. For a 6-year-old, this is top notch. This is very, very high quality. It's a little bit sharp, and this sharpness primarily comes from the short maturation period because 6 years are not long. But this is the point when we add a drop of water to the whiskey. So I take my pipe and I add a bit of a water. I swirl it gently, just like that, and wait a bit. In the meantime, you see here that what I discussed beforehand, I brought it down here. In terms of savoriness, I gave like 2.5 points out of 5 because there is a lot going on, but obviously it won't be a super complex whiskey because it's fairly young. And also the texture and body, I would say that this is like a medium body. It has a very nice creaminess, some oiliness, but yeah, I mean, for its age and for it's a very proper whiskey. So I really enjoy it. And as you see also from the map, it's fairly complex. So yeah, now that I added some water, it opened up more, and it's incredibly fresh. It's very transparent. There is a touch of smoke. There is some sweetness that it's not overpowering. I really enjoy this. This couple of drops of water helps it to open up even more. I'm getting now some more fruits like apples, maybe some apricots. Lovely. There's some sweetness. There's a touch of spiciness as well. It's very fresh. A lot of lemons and citrus. Good whiskey. So this is how you should approach whiskey. And this is the flavor map from Eddie Ludlow. An alternative. You will see here some different categorization. So here really there is no good or wrong flavor map. There are different styles, so to say. So how to get more for your money? And this is a very important point. So first of all, you know now that you have to use the proper glass. Otherwise, you will miss so much. If you start with a tumbler, the flavors, the aromas will just simply escape. It will be much more difficult to pick up those nuances. Always drink it on room temperature and consider adding a couple of drops of water because that will help open up your whiskey. Also, here is a rule of thumb, and this I copied basically from Ralphie. You can check Ralphie reviews on YouTube. I really like the guy. In my opinion, probably the best YouTuber out there in terms of single malt whiskeys. 1 year in the cask should be equal to 1 minute in the glass. So the older the whiskey, the more you have to let it breathe, the more you have to let it rest in the glass in order to open up. This is a rule of thumb. Most of the time works. Sometimes the whiskey benefits if you leave it there a bit more. But yeah, devote time and focus, read about the house type. So as I said, you have to concentrate. At first it will be difficult, but if you read about it and if you also check about the specific distillery and about the specific bottling, you will get much more because you will know what to expect. Tasting order. What I mean by that is that if you are tasting several whiskeys in a row, if you are comparing that, please try to make a meaningful order. So for example, if a whiskey is very smoky, you should leave that for the end. If a whiskey has a higher strength, then again, you should leave that rather at the end. So try to make a meaningful order from your whiskeys. Eating before and during. So once you are drinking whiskey, you should definitely not do that with an empty stomach. So you should eat beforehand, but not right beforehand. So eat at least 1 hour beforehand and try to omit spicy or very intense foods because it will just influence your palate, how you um, how you taste those flavors. During during the tasting, you should rather not eat anything, but if you want to, just eat some bread, like alone, or some very neutral foods. So try to avoid very intense food again. You should be healthy ideally, because if your noses are full, you won't smell anything, and also avoid smoking, because if you smoke, that will again influence the whole experience. A dram. This is a quantity that you will hear in Scotland and in Ireland. So a dram is roughly between 2.5 or 3.5 centiliters. It's not really an exact measurement, but a dram is roughly what you should drink in one sit. Don't drink too much, please. It won't make any sense. Really, this is a sipping spirit. You should just sip it and enjoy. So 2.5 would be somewhere here, this much really. So that should be enough. And taste is subjective. And as you saw, what I showed you, you can categorize it differently. You can use different words because depending on your diet, depending where you come from, you will have different experiences. Like imagine that if someone never had an apple, he or she won't know how an apple tastes. So that person will definitely not say that, wow, this is apples, because, she or he never tasted it. So, and that's completely normal. This is why whiskey tasting is so wonderful, because everyone can have kind of an opinion on it. Yes. And that being said, I say once again, thank you very much for watching the first 3 videos and also this one now. You are very well equipped to taste whiskey and to have discussions about whiskey. You already have a clue where to start, what kind of whiskey to buy, um, what kind of styles are there, and so on. And now you know what you need to taste the whiskey and how you should approach it. So thanks for watching. If you have questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out in the comments or via email. I am more than happy to get in touch with you. And in 2 weeks, I will post my very first whiskey review. Stay tuned. Take care. Bye bye.